Hello everybody, welcome back to Cinema Savvy. It is myself George bringing a brand new video, and it is the first video in a brand new series, as today we're going to be talking about how Harry Potter should be adapted for HBO. Of course, the series is now filming here in the UK, and this is a series I've spoken about doing throughout the year in the background. We've been covering the new series with the official casting announcements and loads of other things, and I'm delighted to finally get this underway. The timing has worked out well. It is, of course, the fictional birthday of Harry Potter today. There hasn't been an announcement at this time, so I'm putting this out there. And if this is dropping on Friday, this means that something did come out in the later hours of Thursday. So I'm going to be talking about each of the books across the next 7 weeks and how I would love to see them be adapted for the series. And I've just got to clarify, I've set myself some ground rules, I've got some criteria, but ultimately this is me talking about this as a fan of those books, as someone that read them as a kid, as an adult, and as recently as obviously now I've reread all 7 of them to be able to do the series. It has taken me a fair few months. There's one book in particular that took me maybe 3 months to read, the book I'm not the most fond of, but don't worry, that isn't going to be episode 1, that's going to be in a few episodes time. And I'm excited to talk about doing this video series, and I've got to say with this, I do want to hear from people watching at home, so please do comment with what you want to see in the Harry Potter HBO series. Comment your thoughts and ideas on this as a series itself. I'm going to be pre-recording all 7 of these. I'm not recording them in a batch. I might do one every couple of days or one a week and just giving myself enough time to edit. So I will look at anyone's comments and reply to them. Things you'd like to see included in the show that aren't in the books. Maybe there's things that could be extended upon or delved into more. I know with the casting announcements that's been done, we might be looking at seeing this world fleshed out a little bit more. And that is quite exciting. And as far as the show goes, obviously we know it is filming. We know this is probably going to be one of the biggest shows in production for the next decade. Obviously the book series is finished. It finished a very long time ago, so it is all there to be completed, which is what differentiates it from the film. And that is going to have an impact on how I've been looking at the series, and you will see me looking down a lot as well, because I have here notes on every single Harry Potter book I've read. As I've been reading them, I've been taking notes. What episode should this be in? How would I like to see this done? Are there characters or things that should be brought in earlier or expanded upon? And tried to do that. And as I said, this is me doing this video. This isn't me saying, HBO, you must do it this way. Absolutely not. This is me trying to have a little bit of fun, trying to get more excited for the series and seeing where it can go, revisiting the books I've not read in, I want to say like just under 10 years. I think I last read them when I was at uni, just before Fantastic Beasts came out. So it's been a while since I've read them. And now there is a series in development. It's a very different mindset. And now we're starting to see actors attached to this. When I'm reading those books, there are certain actors, I guess we can say, which I'm starting to connect more and see more in characters. And there's other actors where naturally I'm still going to see all the actors when I'm reading, as in the ones I saw in the films growing up with. So it's going to be interesting to talk about that. And even across the next 7 weeks, we're probably going to get more casting announcements, more announcements on the show, maybe a first official look. Obviously, we won't get a trailer this early, so you just started filming. So I'm excited to talk about this. And I'm going to be setting some ground rules as well. So I have set myself some criteria to be able to do this series. This was way back in January. That's how far ago I'd started mapping this series out. Now some of these things have been confirmed, but I'm sticking to it and I'm going to discuss them as I did then. So my criteria that I've put forward for how I've approached this series, for how I'm going to do this, I've set myself some strict rules. In the same way when we did the fan casting series, we essentially limited it to British actors for British roles. Obviously, we've now got an American as Dumbledore. It was a one-off exception, but I've tried to set myself some criteria just so I don't completely lose the plot doing this. So these are as follows. Number 1, this must be set in the 1990s. I know that's now been confirmed with the photos from the zoo sequence, but with this being billed as the most authentic adaptation of the books, they have to obviously get the time period right, and it does make actually a massive difference to how the series will look and how it will feel. I'm also setting a rule that there has to be 8 episodes per season, every season. And that does mean, yes, the Philosopher's Stone is going to be as long as Order of the Phoenix. But am I going to cop out and change title lengths? No, I'm probably not. I've set some certain rules for myself when I was planning this. There are some episodes which might actually be like an hour and a half. If you look at shows like The Last of Us, HBO dropped the first episode, season 1, it's like an hour and 15. The rest of the series was about an hour each, as it can be, a little bit more for the finale. So I took a tiny bit of flexibility, taken into account with doing these 7 seasons. As I mentioned, the 8 episodes is a lock-in from myself, and my own personal thoughts on that for the show is that hopefully means that we'll get a lot more developed ideas from the first few books rather than compressing the latter books down. It does lend itself more to, we can go into this or we can set this up and we can look at this a little bit more. So that's my intention personally with this. I've also come up with the rule that I have to come up with titles for every episode. Obviously, I'm not going to use the same title twice. And I'm having one step further, and maybe second time over Last of Us today, I'm going to set a rule that there must be a cold open in every single season. And if you're unfamiliar with the logic of the cold open, it is essentially a scene that is not necessarily unconnected, but it is not the opening scene of canonically where it is. And I'll get into that in each series. So every first scene of the series of what I talk about in each episode, it's going to be setting up the mystery of what is to come down the line in that series, because there are a lot of mysteries within this. Certainly the earlier books, almost every single one is an enigma in itself, the title, and that I'm curious to try and delve into a little bit more, and it's made me have to think a little bit more. But with that being said, that is exactly where I'm running with the show. And I guess where we go with this is an extended introduction. I'm obviously going to talk about the Philosopher's Stone now. So what I am doing with the concept, I've got my notes on my screen. I have divvied them up into what I think is going to be 8 episodes. I have the titles, and within that I have the scenes that I took up from the book. And I'm not just going to say, here's the name of a scene. I'm also not going to detail the entire scene from the book. I'm going to talk about why I think this is going to work better on camera, what I like to see in the episode, and what I think this series could do with this. And certainly at some points, and this is a really important thing for the show, granted, maybe like a half to 3/4 of people will have likely, well, let's say about 90% of people have probably seen the films by the time they watch the show. There will be a generation that grows up with the show. Now, they probably will end up watching a season or 2 and then doing the films, then watching the season still. But there may be people that are brand new to it. So I'm trying to structure this like how a TV show should be, like the audience do not already know what is to come, because that is how the TV show does need to be done. And that's a very, very important metric to be used, because from what I've seen from some people discussing this online, they want to put these outrageous things in so early on. Some of the videos I've seen, people talking about credit scenes. There's one really good one really bad one. You know, I'm not doing that. Here's a credit scene of Lucius Malfoy taking the Chamber of Secrets diary out. No, because that's the whole spoiler for the end of season 2, mate. So I'm not doing anything like that. No credit scenes from me. I don't want to do credit scenes into the seasons, but the cold opens are where that sort of balances out for me to have a little bit of fun. So with that being said, let's get started talking episode 1. Episode 1, number 4, Privet Drive. Okay, so I'm going to open, this isn't just, the first season or episode 1. This is the very first thing we're going to see in the entirety of this HBO series. So the logic I have for this is setting up a cold open that has a payoff later on in this season, and going one step further, setting up a cold open that can be revisited multiple times across the 7 seasons. And this isn't me trying to be smart or trying to be like ahead of myself or anything like that. This is something that I think would work very well for viewers. And the cold open I've actually got is Godric's Hollow, and it is Lord Voldemort going into the house, obviously killing James and Lily Potter. Spoiler alert, yes, I'm going to be talking book spoilers in every episode, and for the future ones too. So if you haven't read or seen the films, it's probably not the best of ideas to stick around at now. But what I think would be amazing is to get Voldemort doing that sequence. And the reason I'm talking about revisiting later on in seasons is I want everything to be shot this way, because as the series evolves, as the books evolve, you get further down the line, we then get given more and more scenes of what happened on the night. So if you were to open it up with almost something as easy as that first film, a cloaked figure walking down the street, going into this, we obviously know it's a cottage in this situation, stuff goes on in there. You don't need to show everything. You don't need to show James being killed very quickly. You don't need to show Lily throwing away for Harry, offering herself. You can do that later on. And the reason I'm going to talk about this in this way now is that Lily and James are 21 years old when they die. When you cast the actors for this role, I think it's essential that, not that you end up de-aging them later on, because that's a different conversation for the 7th one, but I would want to try and film as much as I can in season 1 for some of these characters, because you go to the last book and we get to see the night from Voldemort's point of view, and that's something very cool and very different, and I'm sat there saying, film it now. If you're going to keep revisiting Lily and James over time, try and get as many of their scenes done in the first season as you can. It's obviously impractical. It's something that isn't obviously going to happen by a production standard, but it's what I would love to see, because even when you're in the prison of Azkaban, Harry's hearing the screams from his mother, and you could film that. You don't need to show it now, but in this very, very first opening sequence, you've just got to set something up with Voldemort going into the household, maybe just showing it like an outside long shot, flashes of the roof going in. Godric's Hollow is an important one as well, and this is going to be the first time I say this. Naturally, when they made the films back in the year 2001, the first one came out, it obviously was in production in the late 90s. The books hadn't been finished. Some things were known, some actors have been told some things, but the story had not finished, and it has now, and they can go back to those latter things and bring ideas in earlier. Godric's Hollow is mentioned in that very first book, and I think you could build Godric's Hollow now, and you can revisit it in the last book. You can do what you need to do down the line, because it's a very important location within the Wizarding world. It's not just important because of Harry, it's important respectively to the history of Godric Gryffindor. It's also important to Dumbledore's history, to Bathilda Bagshot as well. So much happens in Godric's Hollow. Build it now, make it that, and then when you revisit it in the years that come, you do have this not just immaculate world building, but you have obviously got the ideas and signs of this is the location, this is how we developed it and kept it in this creative way. So that's my elongated cold open, and I'm probably not going to talk about a cold open anywhere near as much as this one. This was just the most obvious thing for me to do, because the follow-on from a cold open, I'm not going to be sitting there saying insert title sequence. I'm curious if they do a title sequence. I'm curious to know how different it'll be if we get a new logo. I do not know yet. But we've got to obviously want to follow the book in a fun way. So we've got to spend a day in the life of the Dursleys, particularly with Vernon. And this is where the book gets a little bit strange. Not necessarily strange, not necessarily a continuity error, but we obviously have what happened to Harry happen already. So that's the cold open, but it also canonically works as the opening scene. We get to spend a life with Vernon. We get to start to see the Wizarding world come in. You've got people celebrating in the streets, and it's obviously been just after Halloween. You've got all these crazy people in these robes. You've got someone who mutters the word, I think, Harry. I did reread this back in January, so you've got to really stick with me for maybe some of these earlier ones when I'm talking about specific moments. But what I find interesting is that you can start to set Vernon up as this individual, and this obviously is 11 years before. So Vernon at this point is going to be in like his mid to early 20s, I think. So even this is a little bit different, but you can spend time with him to build up that something has happened, and if you're not a wizard, you're not going to know what that is. But if you're aware of them, you might have an inkling that something happened somewhere. You can talk about there being over celebrations and so much more, but it's essential that we get to spend time with him. A bit of time with Petunia as well. This is going to be an hour-long first episode. This is our introduction, and with the Chamber of Secrets the Philosopher's Stone being such a short book, you're able to develop those scenes and certain moments. And I think this episode is so important in building up to the revelation that Harry is a wizard, because we're then going to obviously have him being viewed by McGonagall. Because the prologue scene, which rightfully in the film, and I do think it works better that the film opened with Dumbledore, with McGonagall, Hagrid as well, I love the idea that we've spent time with them, so we've seen as audience members how awful these people are. The future staff members are seeing this, and this poor innocent baby is about to get dropped on their doorstep. I can't wait to see how that is. Even minor things like Hagrid referencing Sirius Black's motorbike, that can be brought up as well, because we know where it's going to go in the long term. And I think it's so important to set up the earliest point of Harry's life. And that's kind of what I'm going to talk about with this episode and how it flows, because I'm not just going to jump to 11 years later, it's Dudley's birthday. I'd like to see some of the stranger stuff from Harry's childhood, when he is getting these terrible haircuts and every day he wakes up and his hair's grown back. He accidentally apparates onto the roof of his primary school at some point. We need to build up the relationship of this child having this horrible, horrible, horrible childhood, who hasn't been allowed to have a childhood. So we then in turn need to build up the uncle and the auntie, the cousin, these horrible people, him being bullied everywhere, being made a punch bag, the cupboard under the stairs. And this isn't just montages of little magical moments, but the show is going to have the time to develop this, and in this episode alone it's going to have the most time we ever get, not necessarily away from Hogwarts but away from the wizarding world. And it's so essential in building up this child to having this very difficult, different childhood, and not understanding why he isn't loved and why they fear him as much as they despise him. And you can add in certain extra knowledge, such as Petunia, we ultimately find out wanted to be a wizard and is jealous. You can bring that up a little bit. Granted, at this point in time, she resents the concept of it. The fact that he doesn't know about his mother and father, what happens. So you've got to really build up the first early years of him. And then you do need to get to Dudley's birthday with the zoo, because this is one of the most essential scenes. This is where the story really does begin. And we do have the trip to the zoo. We know there's behind the scenes photos. Now, I'm not going to sit here saying go into that place, that place, that place, but there's an important scene to be had. Dudley and his friends bullying Harry. You've got the snake as well, Dudley going through the glass. All of these are essential as we're leading up to the fact that Harry is going to be having his birthday soon. And from that point on, we can start to move into getting some of the letters appearing. We can go back to the opening moments where we've got Uncle Vernon not liking Wizard kind already, seeing these strange people mutterings of Harry's name. You can play at the fact that they've got the Hogwarts letter, that they're worried at what on earth is this, why can't Harry find out? And you can build up across more and more time in this first episode how frustrating these letters are, the attempts they've made to get them into the house. And you can really play up the fact that they need to get away from here. They do not want him to be associated with the wizards at all. And that's where they're going to go to the island of the lighthouse, all ready for Hagrid to naturally, of course, enter, which would close out the ending of the first episode for me. Episode 2, The Wizarding World. So episode 2 is going to be an interesting one to talk about. It's probably going to be a bit shorter to do than episode 1. I'm not trying to overstate these videos to make them like an hour or anything too ridiculous, but episode 2, we've just spoke about having a cliffhanger with Hagrid at the door. We obviously have to have the speech, Harry finding out he's a wizard. It explains all that wild stuff that's gone on with his life. Hagrid's anger at the Dursleys for hiding him and not telling him about his mother and father. And obviously I title this on the Wizarding World because it isn't just going to be, great, let's grab him, get him to Diagon Alley, get him on the train, let's go. This is sort of 4 or 5 weeks before term time resumes. Harry's birthday is the 31st of July. That's when Hagrid's at the door. And the train's not going to go until September the 1st. So you do have a 4 or 5 week window to play with this. I'm not going to sit here saying go play for 5 weeks, but we can have Hagrid taking Harry away. And then we are going to get Diagon Alley. But even before then, we can have him with the Leaky Cauldron. They do stay there, they wake up there, they have to do all of their shopping, they've got to do everything that is needed of them. And this is where having a TV show really works, because in the books it very quickly goes through. They go and get this, they get that, they get this, and it's kind of done, and it has to be because it's shorter. But we've got a sort of hour to play here, and I'd like to see certain shops, certain characters, certain moments be brought in, not necessarily earlier, but even if it's a moment, a scene, you know, Hagrid and Harry eating ice cream, which we know exists there, you can play up that, because ultimately Diagon Alley is going to serve a purpose for all 8 seasons. They're every year, it's a huge part of it. We know that obviously there's going to be times where it's empty when we get into the latter seasons. We know we're going to get a joke shop at some point, but you can build up character with this street, and I think you have to include, you know, the owlery. You've got to be able to visit these places of when he's getting Hedwig or when he's going to get his robes, and that leads into a very important scene, which is going to be meeting Lucius Malfoy very early on. And I've put an asterisk on this. I've put Lucius Malfoy because we now know that Lucius Malfoy is going to appear in the first season. Or he's been cast at least. Maybe it means they'll film season 2 very soon. But Harry meets Malfoy at Madame Malkin's robes. And you get your first introduction to talking about Muggle-borns. You don't get the term Mudblood, but you get to meet Malfoy and see what he is like as a person, as a character. And he is very much the victim of a poor childhood, you know, a spoilt brat from his mother's side, and having a terrible father as influence on him on the other. That's going to be an essential part of his character trait for 7 seasons, that whilst he isn't redeemed by any means for how awful a person he is, you can see how he ended up the person he did become. And I really like that they could sort of not necessarily start the rivalry, but just bring him in this early sequence, because it doesn't work on film, but it will work in the TV series. And whether that means we have a Lucius Malfoy going into the room, not meeting Harry as such, but being there, being present, or being seen with Draco, I'm quite excited to see what they might do with that. And alongside this scene, we obviously also need to have Harry finding out about Voldemort with Hagrid when they're back at the Leaky Cauldron, when he's discussing what happened to his parents. The fear that Hagrid has in saying the name, that is something that the films do a really, not necessarily poor job of, but as the films get later and there's more things to be condensed down, the book's unable to go into some of that stuff. And by the time it gets Deathly Hallows and saying the name is a weapon and then it's a taboo for Death Eaters to come, you need to build up the courage and all the knowledge that Harry's fine to say Voldemort from day one. He's the reason his parents died. I don't want to blend in more of the flashback like what we've already had already. You've got a very important meeting in the Leaky Cauldron with Professor Quirrell as well, which is going to be a very important scene, not shaking his hand. Because we all know what goes on later on in the episode. And I'm going to talk about Quirrell later. Sorry, I'm laughing because about the snowball sequence I'll talk about later. But there's obviously going to be the big revelation in the season 1. And I'll get to that later on in this. But the second episode is essential for those pre-Hogwarts moments. Ollivander's scene is going to be one of the most important ones because we know the importance of wand lore by the time you get to that final book. You get to understand how Voldemort was defeated. Everything is almost because of not what Ollivander teaches him, but about the cause of the wands. And I'd like to spend more time in these moments. And fair enough, in 2001 they couldn't do this because there was a film. You had 2.5 hours. You had to get everything done. But in this, I personally believe they could do it. And the Ollivander sequence is so essential in doing that because he's got to be seen as not necessarily a creep, but he's almost amazed by how awful Voldemort was and the power he had and what he was able to conjure with a wand. You want to be able to display a sense of wonder in Voldemort, in Ollivander, curiosity, intrigue, and also a bit repulsiveness from him, because he is going to pop up in later episodes. Anton Lesser, by the way, delighted he has been cast. He's going to be perfect for this. But this isn't such an important scene, him getting his wand that stays with him through to the end of the 7 books, because it doesn't always happen. And the relationship with Ollivander is integral to that. So that's a big one for me in this. On top of that, we obviously aren't going to spend a month in Diagon Alley, so we can go back to the house. We can have a montage. We can have his last few weeks where they're scared to talk to him. He's talking less to people. He's being left alone. He's getting ready to go to the school. He's got his robes. He's got his owl. He's got everything he wants. And then we're going to obviously get to the platform, being at King's Cross. I want to include the Dursleys dropping him off, which is going to be very important to this, because granted it is with Hagrid in the films again, the more time we can get with the Dursleys the better. They are almost a comic relief in a way, that it's like an essential part of his journey that he has to go back to the Dursleys every summer. So you've got to build them up as being a little bit more present. Then he sees them for 10 minutes and disappears. He's still got to rely on them to get him round to places. And that also does pair up with later revelations about what Dumbledore had told Petunia all along, about what she had to do for him alongside protection and many other things. So I want to try and develop the Dursleys a little bit more than just being comic relief, but also not forgetting how evil they are and how they have tormented him, particularly with Dudley, because Dudley does get a somewhat redemption later on, that the feelings are very different compared to how they are here, and you've got to show that brat in Dudley. The fact that Harry hates Malfoy, I think, by this first book, more so than the Dursleys, I think he says, is really interesting. So let's have that. Let's have them dropping off. We've got to have a meeting the Weasley family. It's an essential part of this because it isn't just he followed them through the gate and then he just sat in a carriage and Ron was there. We get to meet Ginny, which we know at this point in time, as weird as it sounds, is his future wife-to-be. You've got Mrs. Weasley there. You've got Percy, Fred, George. You can bring in everyone at this point, essentially, bar Bill, Charlie and Mr. Weasley. And I'd like to see that relationship in this as early as you can. You get Fred and George joking around on the train before, them sort of wondering, is it Harry, is it not? Him meeting Ron, and then going into the train and going on the journey. I'm excited to see what happens there, because you've got to build up these two as best friends. You know, they're immediately best friends from the moment they meet in the train. The exact same as Harry's dad and Sirius were when you get later flashbacks. And I'd like to see them not explore that more, but really play into the train ride, because we are going to get that. We're going to get to see other characters pop up. You're going to get Neville, you're going to get Hermione, you're going to get so many of these other year ones with them that it's essential to start building up their relationships. But Harry and Ron from the get-go are best friends, and I think the show could do a great way of developing that. And where I'd like this episode to end is the most obvious visual of all, which is going to be them on the lakes heading towards Hogwarts. It's going to be a massive ending. It's the obvious ending. It's one of the best shots of the first film, and I think that's where episode 2 could safely end, because we have to keep building and building towards Hogwarts. We've got to get there. This is a shorter book as well. You can spend a little bit more time elsewhere, but 2 episodes, like, you're too soon at Hogwarts if you're there by the end of episode, if you're in episode 2. But going past episode 3, if you got to Hogwarts episode 4, that's just too far away. So episode 3 is the sweet spot, which leads us into the next one. Episode 3, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. As titled of episode 3, this obviously is going to be one of the biggest episodes of the first season, because it's going to be the first look at the brand new Hogwarts School. We don't know what it's going to look like. I'm assuming the exterior is going to be the exact same as it always is, like the theme parks. The interior, I guess, is the question people have. I don't think it's going to look like the films. I don't think it's going to look wildly dissimilar to the films. Some people think it might look like Hogwarts Legacy because it might have an older architecture. I still don't know how that would be able to be done because it's a humongous game. Yes, everything's 3D mapped, but I'm curious to see what they can do. But it is an important moment to not rush into showing Hogwarts. As I said, episode 2 ends with the boats going in. And episode 3 needs to start with them going through the halls of the castle for the first time. We've got to be able to see them going into that sorting ceremony, the Great Hall, the other students. And I'm not going to get too niche and nerdy with this, but one concept I love for Hogwarts would be to see some of the older students in this first book. And I know people have seen the news article about the school being built and people being needed. Harry's in year 1 at this point. We're meeting people like Fred and George who were named in that first book and are part of that first book. But why not bring in people like Cedric Diggory early? I'm not saying give them a talking role, introduce them one by one. What I'm saying is you could have some of the older students in attendance in that hall. You could cast an actor now who might have a more important role in 2 years' time or 3 years' time. Or maybe it just will be an extra with certain features to look like someone. But I like the idea that these kids are going to grow up together. And we did get that in the films with the core group. But there are other characters who didn't. You're looking at your Lavender Browns, people that were absent from them as well. So if you create this core group now in the the third episode of the first season, have them stick around for the next 10 years, it would look like a project as much as anything else, and it would be so cool to see. So I'd love to see this just as a whole whilst I'm discussing Hogwarts. And the sorting ceremony, obviously we know the importance of this. We've got Dumbledore we're meeting in person for the first time, and this is going to be essential because although we get the scene obviously on the train getting the chocolate frog card with him and seeing what he looks like for the first time, you go to the Order of the Phoenix, there's probably one of my favourite scenes of the whole book series, which is Dumbledore basically saying to Harry, I've essentially known this about you your whole life and I never wanted to put this on you. I don't want to have to tell you this. Every year I've gone by, I've wanted to say what's about to follow, but I can't. So the context of where I'm talking about here is that Dumbledore knows the moment Harry walks through that door, not only is that Harry Potter, but he knows that kid kind of could be a Horcrux, but I also know that kid had a prophecy made about him and he is going to have one tough time at this school. And the approach to John Lithgow playing is going to be so important. And I'm really curious, especially in these earlier books, how much of Dumbledore we'll see. Will we see too much or too little of him? Will we see his scenes developed more? Because he does have much more of a role from sort of the 4th book onwards, whilst there are scenes with him in these other ones. It's really 4 onwards when I think he starts to come into, not necessarily his own, but you get to learn more about him and see his relationship build with Harry truly somewhat more. So this is important. Snape's going to be important. The first look, Harry instantly hates him. Snape knowing that's Lily Potter's son, because we now know that as readers. The moment he locks eyes with him, he's already committed his lifetime to helping him. He's really told that Dumbledore in advance 11 years ago. So the performance that's going to have to be on Snape is going to be one of the toughest to do in the film, in the series, sorry. On top of the fact that there's obviously a race swap, which people have got very different opinions about. The fact you're following in Alan Rickman's footsteps is probably one of the most difficult things because he just is Snape, always has been Snape. Sorry, my camera battery cut, so I hope I've not lost too much there. So I was talking about Snape, and one of the big things Papestu has to really not worry about, and I don't mean following Alan Rickman's footsteps, is the fact that this is a completed character arc, and his approach to him has to have all that pre-contextual knowledge of Harry, of what happened to his mother, the vow he's taken, the fact he did betray her, whilst bringing in the loathing factor of hating James, of hating Sirius, of the others. And I think it's so important for the relationship for Snape and Dumbledore to have that pre-contextual knowledge. Granted, your McGonagalls will and others will. People will remember teaching his parents. That's also kind of the point with it. They will remember his dad, the troublemaker. They were curious to see how he does. but it's so essential for Snape to have a different relationship from the get-go, because when you get to the Prince's tale in the 7th book, it has all the pre-context of this. And I'm going to also add this in, talking Snape and Dumbledore and having that knowledge. I'll talk about this in much more detail in the 7th episode, but I do want certain scenes filmed for the latter one now. And I mean it in the concept of age, that these actors will obviously age up a little bit. Granted, across 9-10 years, you might not look too different for either actor, but when you're getting pre-context knowledge of Dumbledore saying to Snape, watch out for Quirrell, you can do that in a day here. Put that in an archive somewhere. You don't need to do too much more around it, so that's a side thing from me, but the sorting ceremony is obviously so essential to this first episode, and meeting all the characters, all the teachers, all the new students. I do want a little bit more detail. I don't need a class of 100 people read out for the year group, but I do sit there thinking you could really fly through the sorting ceremony for some. Don't just pick highlights of 3 or 4 people, but you could really develop the people who we know are going to play big roles in this. If they are casting all the other kids to be there together for the next 7-8 years, then why not give them all their each individual moment? And if they're going to be glorified extras, then that's also fine. You can do that too. So I'm excited at what they do with this one. And a big thing that comes with this isn't just getting the feast and meeting the ghosts that follow after. As I said, more detail for so many things. I'd like to see a little bit more from the Grey Lady, the Bloody Baron. You don't need to set it up in that first season, but you could have them apart, far apart. You could do there's some sort of relationship thing going on there, because that's obviously important when you get to the Horcrux, when you get to the finale. So there's so much knowledge later on that can be brought back and put into play as early as this first season. Obviously, Peeves is going to be a big one everyone wants as well, which is totally understandable too. So we've got the feast. And then we've got a more important thing, Harry's first dream. The very first night he's at Hogwarts, he has a dream, and he's being strangled by, I think, Quirrell's turban, and it's drawing him more and more from memory to what we would later find out to be Voldemort. But you can bring up that very weird idea, that very weird dream, because contextually it means nothing at this point in time. It's just a weird dream a kid's had. But we know it is the first dream of him and Voldemort together. And we know that's going to be a big part of also the next 7 seasons. So there's a lot of setup to be done here. And that's kind of where I go with this, that the first week, whilst we've got the Potions Master scene, which is the first time he meets Snape, we get to see how awful Snape is to him from day one. You get to see people like Hermione coming in to see her intelligence, to see other things happening. I am also in this position where I think the show would really benefit from showing us a lot of the other lessons, because the other lessons are going to be important. I'm not saying go and cast your teachers. We don't need to see Professor Trelawney in the first season. She's going to appear in the 3rd one. But if they've got an actor they've cast for it, they've got them on standby, you can have other characters in the classroom. Maybe not Harry, but let's say Professor Binns. You can put him in the first season, no doubt. You can cast your actor for that one. And even if it's a montage, the first week at school is going to be essential. On top of that, the fact that we are needing to pad out a 240-page book into 8 episodes for what I'd like to do, this episode 3 has to be about establishing the school, establishing lessons, the teachers, people who are going to spend time with what do you learn in each of the lessons, because even things like Muggle studies have importance when you get to the last series. So all of that, I think, is so important to be brought in early. And it doesn't even need to be much of a scene. It doesn't need to say, here's this teacher, here's that. Even just quick montages of them in different classrooms and learning things, I think would go a long way. The obviously big one after the Potions Master is the first flying lesson, which is obviously we get the scene of Draco, Neville, the Remembrall. That's obviously going to play a huge part of the series because Harry's obviously scouted, he's found by McGonagall to be part of the Quidditch team, the youngest Seeker, finding out that his dad was a Seeker too. That's going to be a great scene and a big thing for me with this, and you get Oliver Wood too. Quidditch has to be essential to the series. It has to be essential to the show. It is in the books. It's something that there's no excuse not to develop, particularly in the first 3 seasons, where the Quidditch Cup is a huge part of the storylines. And I'd like to see that developed a little bit more. I'd like to see more time spent on the training grounds with them, with Oliver Wood, or with the other Quidditch players, seeing a bit more how the sport works and how it functions, how big it is as an event for them at the school. Because the films do an incredible job in the first 2 with the importance of Quidditch, but we don't really get a look into anything more. We don't get the extent of the knowledge of the Quidditch Cup. Let's have them going into the rules of, you know what, we're going to allow him to have a broomstick. We can lay the trap that year ones can't have them, but we can bring in reasons as to why and start developing McGonagall's relationship with Harry. So episode 3 is essential, and that really does start with that. And where I want to end the 3rd episode, because there is a mystery to this still, it's the Philosopher's Stone. We have to start getting there eventually. Dumbledore spoke about it in his speech. We want the midnight duel. And this is something people that obviously everyone knows are missing from the film. Very few things were from the first 2 books, first 3 books maybe. Understandably so, they were sort of 2.5 hours, I think Chambers 2 hours 40 potentially. So very few things were missed. And I'm not saying that means it's impossible to not miss something, but you've got the time and patience to look into these. So I'd like the midnight duel to be a part of this. That's obviously Malfoy's jealousy with Harry, with everything that he's done, the fact that Malfoy tried to set him up to get told off, and Harry had already gone off and been made a seeker, which we later know Malfoy wanted to be, because he can't do that in year 1, and we know he's going to Lance Scholl his way into power in year 2. But a big thing here is ensuring there's a bit more book accuracy, because after the midnight duel, when they're running from Filch, the fact it's a trap by Malfoy, for those unfamiliar with that, we have to have them in the room with Fluffy. Because we need to start setting up this enigma of, okay, what's the bigger picture for the season? What is going on other than this kid just starting school? Because you can't throw everything in early into the season to set the Philosopher's Stone up. Granted, you've obviously got Gringotts in the 2nd episode, all the non-wizarding stuff. You can set up the fact that he's met Quirrell already, but you have to start thinking, okay, there's something else going on here and at Hogwarts. And having Fluffy and then running out, having Neville with them so important for this too, because of where his character goes later on in the season. So that's the end of the 3rd episode. A much safer episode, an easier episode to do. Episode 4, Quidditch. So I've titled episode 4 Quidditch, and I know I spoke about it very briefly, about Harry obviously getting the Seeker, his first flying lesson. Because there's not as much happening at this point in the book and in this stage of the story, I think you can really have the Quidditch episode be this episode. I'm not saying the whole 1 hour's got to be on Quidditch, by the way. We need to keep having practice. You need to see Harry learning how to play, learning the rules. Bring in Ron, teaching him about the professional side of it. Meeting the other chasers, the other players around him, because they're going to play a big part in the first 3 seasons. As I said, I'd love this to be a big part of the first 3 seasons. Before we even get to the actual Quidditch match, we've then got Halloween, which is a huge part. And I almost put it as the title of this episode, Halloween, but I am sticking to Quidditch because we had Fluffy last time. We need to really play up the troll in the dungeon. Because whilst we spoke about the montage time at school that Harry's already friends with Ron, they aren't the golden trio yet. Hermione's not really part of the equation at this point in time. So by having what happened on Halloween, the argument, Ron mocking her, Wingardium Leviosa, to then having them all involved together to protect them from the troll is one of the most important part. And from memory, I think it even says in the book, like, from that moment on, they were 3 best friends. And that's a huge part of this episode. But Halloween doesn't need to be a latter part of this, especially when I tell you what episode 5 is. So you've just got a date. You're on October 31st, so we'll have Halloween come and go after a bit of Quidditch at the start of the practice. I then want the build up to the first Quidditch match, and obviously it's against Slytherin. And we need to really see the nerves kicking in, that this is a big moment for the school. At this point in time, he's just a kid at school. How do you follow a kid at school with excitement? And this is where maybe the first early seasons will be slightly more difficult to justify to some viewers. They might feel things are slower, less developed. But obviously the first Quidditch match is humongous. He gets the broomstick through McGonagall. They lift the rule for him alone. We can have the whole match. We can develop a bit more time with it. We can see the other chasers, the other roles, the other players. We've got to have, obviously, Harry being cursed on the broomstick. That's a big part of what happens. You've got them going after Snape and other things there. You've got to start accusing them of going for individuals. So the Quidditch match is a big part of episode 4. And then post-match celebrations where they're with Hagrid at Hagrid's hut, we're going to get the first name drop of Nicholas Flamel. And that's going to start leading the enigma more into where I'm going with the season and where I'm structuring these episodes. Because each week there needs to be a bit of a... You're not just coming back because it's Harry Potter. You've got to treat it like, what is the mystery? What story is developing episode by episode? And once episode 4 has been quicker to talk about, there's not too much more to it, which leads into the next one. Episode 5, Harry's First Christmas. So I've titled this Harry's First Christmas, and it's a really big one because I'm not trying to be clever on words or anything like that. He's had a horrible life. This is essentially his first real Christmas. He has presents from friends, from Ron's mom. We've got some massive revelations to come in this, and obviously what happens in this. So I'm going to go into this episode a little bit more now. And I kind of mentioned episode 4, right? That I didn't want Halloween to be at the end of the episode, because if you juxtaposition, episode 4 is the ending is Halloween, episode 5 is suddenly winter. We're not dumb enough to know time has passed, but you want it to flow. Like if someone's binging it, you want at least a little bit of time. You want an event to have took place between Halloween and Christmas, because then it's just too much by the numbers of it being a season, which is why that Quidditch focus on the last episode worked for me personally. And where I'm going with this one is, as you head into winter, you can start bringing in things that are going to be important. You can have wizard's chess. You can have students going home. You can have Hogwarts decorated. Listen, we know how big Hogwarts is for Christmas. We know so many people call Harry Potter films Christmas films. It is that thematic meaning that Christmas is a huge part of it. And in every single season, I have selectively spoke about Christmas that's part of the series. I've still had to give them different names. It's not just called Christmas Year 1. There's going to be a different Christmas for every reason, but it's a big part of the books. The books always cover a school year, and this kind of is in that sort of opening third to halfway point. So the Christmas episode I'm excited for. And you can spend more time with them having the Christmas feast, seeing the students that are left. We can really play up the jumpers they got from Ron's mom, the relationships they have, Ron with Fred and George and the Weasleys. And I think it's so important for me, and I'll talk about this more in the second episode, is the Weasley family get a lot more development than I understandably so why the films couldn't do so. But a big part of this episode is going to be at getting the invisibility cloak, because we do know with the new context that this is one of the 3 Deathly Hallows. And of course, we're not going to know this for 7 more years. But you can really play up the importance of the scene of this cloak, what design they'd like. Do they want it to look more ancient? Do they want it to look different? I know, obviously, when that first one came out, it just looks like a blanket, and no one particularly cares for it. But the cloak has a greater meaning in the books than it does in the films. And this is a humongous moment for him. The fact it was his father's, and that means a lot to him. The fact it was sat with Dumbledore at the time his father died, that's going to play an important part later on. So him getting the cloak is a big, big moment as an understatement. Probably one of the biggest moments from this episode. And even that follows up with them researching for Nicholas Flamel, because we are going to get the sequence of the Mirror of Erised. We are going to get Harry seeing all of his now deceased relatives in there, because obviously we know it is more than just his parents. There is the family tree. We know through his mother's side, although she's Muggle-born, we've got his dad's side, who have come from a very illustrious Wizarding family. No, we don't need backstories on them, but the fact that the one thing he yearns for is family, which he can't. And at the same time of this, you can really play at the dynamic of Ron, where he gets to get an inkling of his relationship, that he's not the jokester like the others, he's not the girl like Ginny, he isn't the perfect grade one like Percy, he's not the cool one like Charlie. You get to see what he wants from his life, and it is to essentially be seen a little bit more. It is him holding the Quidditch Cup, and I can't remember if it's Head Boy as well, but he has all the dreams that are essentially all of his brothers' lives packed into one little moment. I'd like to see that be a big thing of Ron's character arc, that we get to see him jump out from just being the youngest Weasley son and having this expectation on him. We get to see him really becoming his own across the seasons, plural there, obviously. And then I want to develop more of Harry going back. And of course we get the conversation with Dumbledore, which is a very important conversation. And even knowing Dumbledore, what he truly sees, although he says he sees himself with a pair of socks, we know it's more to it than that. And the last book again explains that. So this is where I keep talking about the last book or later books, not just because I read the Deathly Hallows last, because so much of it does come full circle across the years. And obviously the Mirror of Erised is something that only does appear in the first book. It's a big thing in this episode. It's a big thing of Christmas. You get to see him reflecting the fact he doesn't have a family, but at the same time it is starting to move that story forward. The fact it's going to another location, that obviously Dumbledore's going to end up bewitching it for the Philosopher's Stone, and the fact that we're going to get a little bit more detail about Nicholas Flamel. And this is where we're going to head into the next episode. Episode 6, Norbert the Dragon. So episode 6 is one of the trickiest ones I had to work on. I'm going to open with the second Quidditch match, because I've already said the Quidditch Cup's important for this. We've got these 3 kids who are continuously blaming Snape for everything going wrong. They think Snape's out to get the Philosopher's Stone. And we know that's not the case as viewers, but we need to start showing that on screen, that there are reasons to doubt him, but there are also reasons to somewhat trust him. And Snape does referee the second Quidditch match because of what Quirrell did before. Long term is to be a protector for Harry, but in the short term we can have him giving fouls against Gryffindor for everything, the fact he still does hate Gryffindor as a house. So that's a big thing for this, is seeing that second match, and we've got to have Gryffindor win it again. We've got to keep building up Harry as this amazing Seeker, because he does have one of the best ever Seeker records, which will be something I'll speak about maybe in the 6th episode. But obviously the core of this is about Norbert, it's about Hagrid, it's about finding out a few more things. So Norbert's a difficult one to talk about. It isn't something I particularly not enjoy. It has a purpose in the book. It is a way to bring in the fact that Hagrid's quite dumb, can I say it nicely, that he was wowed over by an egg, And in exchange for that, he gave away loads of information about Fluffy. So Norbert's important to bring in here. And if you're looking at the long-term picture, this is like an 8-episode series, right? So you can spend a little bit more time of Hagrid having this baby dragon, of the problem it's going to cause him. And you can also use this to bring in the oldest Weasley brother. You can have Charlie be involved in this because it's something that rightfully didn't work in the film. You can't have him being took away, you can't have everything else, but you can do that in this, and you can have their little mission of Norbert the Dragon being taken out of the school, and that's their way to set them up for the detention sequence, because at the peak of their issues of them being at school, the biggest problem that they have is the fact that they get caught in detention. And I love that. I love the fact that they then get hated by everyone in the house, that losing them 150 points is what's cost them everything. They could lose the cup, they get bullied, they get mocked, people dislike them. You can play that up in this episode. And episode 6 is a tricky one because you're sort of in that bridge of there's been some action, there's been some big moments already. You've had the Quidditch match, you've had the Christmas, but we're not yet at the Forbidden Forest, and we're obviously not at the finale. So Norbert's going to be the centre point of this, but it has to end the episode for me with them finding out that they are going to be in detention. And where I then stick with that is talking about episode that follows. Episode 7, The Forbidden Forest. So this might sound like I'm dragging it out now, and I'm not trying to. It is a shorter book, the first one. But The Forbidden Forest is a huge part of the series. And actually there's a lot of lore in there, and a lot of, we'll talk about the centres later, but this is a huge part of a location that's going to get revisited almost in every single one. And we can afford to give it an episode. So the fact that they have to have detention there, and this isn't Ron, this is book accurate, this is Neville, we can really play up the fearfulness of Malfoy when he's catching them too. The fact that these individuals are a problem, and the fact their detention is with Hagrid and he's taken them to the forest, it sort of adds to the levels that Hagrid has had as not being the most switched on and putting his students in peril. That's something really important to talk about. Where I'm kind of going with this is the Forbidden Forest could function as an episode by itself, because you could not make it horror as such, but you could make it an episode where they're going to be sat there by themselves. And where I'm sort of going with this is building up to the moment of the Unicorn of Voldemort. I want to spend time with the Centres, because they know the truth about Harry. They know through the stars that there is a scenario in which Harry and Voldemort are in the forest and Harry's killed by Voldemort. I think that's from memory how it was. You can then set up the Firenze and Bane feud, which has an important comeback in multiple seasons' time, because the Centaurs are part of the finale at the Battle of Hogwarts, but their role is very different after a certain scene has happened. So I want to play at the fact that we've got these Centaurs that look at the stars, that look at the moon, that astronomy is a big part of their story, of what they are as creatures. And again, understandably, the film couldn't develop that, but the series is going to have the potential to do so. So the Forbidden Forest, for me, could be a really fun, like 45, 50-minute episode in that forest. You can then bring in the fact that the Centaurs are there, that there's the unicorn blood, and the fact they're working out that Voldemort is on the way back, that Voldemort wants the stone. And at the same time as this, you can then start also bringing up, not the childish side of this, but whilst you've got the Forbidden Forest chunk of the episode, you can then bring in the exams, which is a big part of this first book. It's a big part of multiple books. They're our students. They have to do the exams. And I think it would be interesting to see that explored a little bit more as you build up to the fifth one, because obviously what happens in the finale is a big part of what happens in episode 7. And we are going to get the moment where they realise that Voldemort's going to attack the castle that night, that Dumbledore has been put away on ministry business, the fact they do speak to McGonagall. And where I want to go with this is leading up to a really fun finale, because you've got to build up to a season finale, as you should. We know where it's going to go. And I think it's essential to have this episode end, not with Neville stopping them, because that's the scene that wins in the House Cup. That's him standing up to them. The fact we'd have the context that he'd been in detention with them due to them breaking the rules. You can play up his bravery in that scene a little bit more. But you have to end this with Fluffy in the trapdoor. You have to end it with them going in, the fact it's already there. They're all adamant that Snape was behind it. And you can just have them going down the trapdoor, fade to black, and that's the end of the 7th episode. Episode 8, The Philosopher's Stone. So talking the finale is going to be the really big one for me. And this is probably going to be the funnest episode of the season. I think it's one everyone's looking forward to. We are going to have the quest to get to the Philosopher's Stone. And we're going to go through all the rooms, because if you've only seen the films, if you watch this on the pretense you've seen the films, then I've really been curious to know what you think. We have to have the Devil's Snare sequence. We have to have the key sequence. We of course have to have Wizard's Chess. We're going to bring back the Troll, because the Troll was meant to be Quirrell's part of what happened. It's a bit of a no say in this, because the Troll's already knocked out because of who's been before. We then have the potion scene, which is obviously Snape's challenge as part of it, which is great because they're going to keep thinking it's Snape still. And it's a great way to sort of bring out Hermione from the story to put Harry through to the end by himself. I know I've sort of whizzed through that scene, but we all know these sequences, and they would just work so well as a season finale. There'd be a lot of enjoyment for people. It'd be action-packed. It would make up for a slightly slower episode 7. And where I'm going to talk about this one is getting to the sequence with Quirrell and the unveiling of Lord Voldemort. The fact that it wasn't Snape all along, that he is gobsmacked, it's not Snape. He was so set on it being Snape and it's not him. That's a really big part of the story that they need to proceed with. And kind of where I'm going to go a little bit further with this is having the revelation of Voldemort. And my big thing, and I know there's murmurs online about this, maybe they'll cast or announce it soon. There's murmurs that they've cast out to Voldemort and they don't want to unveil him until later on. I believe that. To an extent. I would personally like to see the actor hidden until this airs on TV. It probably will leak in an ideal world. There's no way they'll be able to keep it quiet. And if it's Cillian Murphy, he's going to get hounded at 20 years later in January until he says something out of anger. The reveal of the actor is going to have to be the reveal of the back of the turban. And yes, you can bring up the fact in the winter that the Weasleys threw a snowball at Quirrell's turban, which meant they by default threw a snowball at Voldemort, but this is a really big moment of this, that Harry meets Voldemort for the first time as an adult, and it's got to have that face that we're going to see in the 4th book onwards. The face that strikes fear into others. Get the design right, and this is where I sort of look into the TV side that there's no excuses for continuity not being right in this first season, because everything is laid out ahead. And Voldemort is one of them. Why he's alive, we know because of Horcruxes. Why he wants the Resurrection Stone, because he wants to come back into his body. These are all at play in this, and it's so integral for this to work. But with this scene itself, it all relies on Voldemort. And obviously we're going to have the moment where Harry does kill Quirrell. And he's not going to turn to stone like the film. As much as that works and terrifying was as a kid, it will work much better by default. The fact that Harry just kills a teacher, wakes up in hospital, and the whole school know that he just killed his Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, that Voldemort came back. I love this. And I think it's got one of the most important scenes is the hospital sequence with him and Dumbledore. We have to have Dumbledore not being able to tell Harry about why he goes for him, about why Voldemort wants him. We know that's a big revelation in the 5th book. But we can have these flittering moments of Dumbledore where he's thinking about it and he chooses not to. You can explain why he didn't die through why he survived, through what his mum did, going back to the cold open. You can flesh out the cold open sequence a little bit more. And I also want them to really develop that opening scene of let's piece this puzzle of why Voldemort did what he did and why he didn't. And you've got to have this innocent 11-year-old kid having a discussion with, a 90-year-old teacher about why he's been trying to be killed. And it's really difficult to do, and it's quite dour for a finale. So you don't just end it with the hospital sequence. You've got to talk about the fact that he obviously didn't win the Quidditch Cup, that Harry missed it because he was injured, he was in hospital, the fact that Ron and Hermione are both okay as well. I want to end it on something a bit of a lighter note. So I want to do the end of year feast, because we have to have the moment Gryffindor win the House Cup. We have to have Neville get his moment why he's at Gryffindor. Yes, Dumbledore changes the rules for them to win, but you can really develop all of that. You can still have Snape looking very dour. You can have Dumbledore tell Harry about the fact that Snape essentially owed him a life debt for James saving his life. That's why Snape looked out for him. It works as an excuse for the first season, and it kind of sets up where we're going to go. And this episode will finish with them back on the train, them back at King's Cross. And I do want the Dursleys to return, because they have to pick them up from the station. You can have Mrs. Weasley there too, but there'd be something about making it feel like, okay, let's get ready for season 2. No credit scene, no teasing too much, but you can have the Dursleys picking Harry up at the train station and Ron saying and Hermione will speak to you over the summer, because we know that doesn't happen. And we'll find out at the start of the 2nd season. And that's kind of where I'm going with this. So that's the end of my first season. I don't even know how this video is going to come across. My camera's gone twice now, which is ridiculous. So I'm hoping editing this isn't going to be that bad. But yeah, that's how I would adapt the first season of Harry Potter on HBO. I'm curious to know what people think, if they hate it, if they like it. Any feedback on this series, please do give it, because I don't know how this is going to come out as a full video. I don't know what to expect. It could be good, it could be terrible, but either way, please give me some feedback on this. There'll be one video a week for the next 7 weeks, and obviously when we get to the later ones, it's going to be much easier to do as long as I can figure out what's going on my camera. So that is me rounding up for today. I hope you've all enjoyed it. Take care, and I'll see you on the next one.